Welcome to Table Tennis Philosophy. Appreciate all your comments, especially the one that said I may resemble a very old Luke Skywalker. I could do worse. But today we're going to talk about anti-spin rubber. Why are we talking about anti-spin rubber? It's a good question. I don't see a whole lot of it out there, but let me tell you a little bit of background. If you've ever thought about using anti or played against it, my last video I did was talking about that it's harder and harder to play defense, and using anti is definitely getting into a defensive approach. A lot of players will use it on their backhand and put some, drop a short anti shot and then attack with their forehand. There's some possibilities of using it effectively in some ways, but using anti is probably the most difficult type of rubber to use at even in intermediate levels. And if you are good with anti and comfortable using it, it'll be effective against lower level players somewhat, but the tougher players are not going to have much trouble. They will attack the anti, and one of the big problems is you can't normally make what would be a conventional stroke with your backhand. If you watch some of the players that use anti on their backhand, they're basically running around trying to block everything, just trying to deaden every shot, not really having many opportunities to put any pressure on from their backhand anti side. And that's just not the way most players learn how to play, and it makes it really, really difficult to transition to anti to your backhand. And you say, well, what about long pips? People do the same thing with long pips. With long pips, you at least get some grip. The pips bend, there's a little bit better ways of manipulating the ball, and it's usually a bit more effective with long pips. I've transitioned at least one of the people I trained who started off with anti on his backhand, really liked it, and when he went to long pips, liked it even more. His game had gone up from beginner level to a low intermediate when he had gone to anti on his backhand, and then more to middle intermediate and a bit more advanced player, somebody that can compete with really good players once he used long pips on his backhand. But it's a tough way to survive, and the thing is that anti provides no friction at all, and that's the appeal of it. You're thinking, okay, well, everybody else is using spin, I'll use no spin, and that'll be the weapon that I'll use. Unfortunately, it's not a real effective weapon for most people, and it's always, once you go to anti, it's going to be on one side of your racket or the other, which for better players, they'll know how to attack that, and it really won't give them much trouble. The thing with junk rubber is you want it to cause more problems for your opponent than it does for yourself. I haven't found that to be the case with anti. Now, unlike very many players, I have used anti on my forehand. In fact, I've got a racket right here. It's one of the Spin Lord antis, and it's got a little bit of grip, so it wasn't as hard to use, but there wasn't a whole lot of upside to it. It's a change of pace, so yeah, I could twiddle, I could do a few things with it, but in the end, it's not that effective against the players you'd probably beat anyway, and against the tougher opponents, it really doesn't do much at all. You'll get a few points from just really dead ball shots, but if you could make every shot just perfectly like that, it'd be great. But normally doesn't work out quite that way. And in fact, if you see the handful of top anti-players, you'll see it doesn't always even work out for them, and they're the best in the world at it. So there are a few, and you can find them online. Just Google anti-spin rubber, and they will probably come up pretty quick. But you think, well, all right, I'm talking about anti-spin as if it's, there's just one kind of anti-spin out there, and that's certainly not the case. There is some anti that is so slick, it's almost like playing with a piece of glass on there. There's going to be zero grip whatsoever. Now, if that's what you're looking for, and you can handle that, yeah, it does cause some problems for your opponents, but it will also put you playing in a very unconventional way. If you're playing it on your backhand, you can't make a normal backhand with that rubber. It's just going to go straight into the net. So you're basically trying to make the shot short enough and dead enough. Gravity will pull it down and pull it down short, and allow players to have to lift the ball up, and at which point you can hopefully attack it with your forehand. And that is one type of anti, and but then there's variations of that, down to anti that has some grip, some is so slow that you can barely get the ball over the net. And again, you're in a completely different world if you're playing like that. Not that it couldn't be a little bit frustrating for people to play against it, but it's probably going to hurt you more than help you. And I've been tempted to go to anti a number of times. It's sort of fun in some ways, and I like messing around with equipment, and it always ends up being kind of a failed experiment, and I've gone through it a number of times. You also have what's known as the half anti or almost anti-spin rubber. Again, at least you can start making kind of conventional shots with that. And like I said, I used it on my forehand and didn't really do a thing for me. But you can get closer to the types of shots that you would make if you had regular smooth rubber with some grip. But now, what have you really got other than a very slow ball that has very little spin? Most of your opponents are going to welcome that and say, thank you very much. That's, I mean, I've tried it. Yeah, again, you'll have moderate success against some players, but in the long run, it's really not helpful. I'm thinking I'd love for anti-spin to be able to work because it is fun, but I've found that it typically doesn't. It's not going to be, it's very, very hard to work into your game. It doesn't chop as well as long pips. You can't control the ball as well, and you're really going to have to know what you're doing. Now, I know of one player who uses it and twiddles to get to it, so you infrequently see that anti-spin shot, and I'm sure that it messes up some players. For me, I'm usually not thrown by it at all. I'm very aware of which side of the racket he used. As soon as I see the anti, I'm going to make a different stroke. And I think most of your players that have played a while will recognize that quickly, and it's not going to really cause any problems for them. So I don't know, maybe you're thinking of buying anti-spin and thinking, well, I'm the exception. Maybe you are, I doubt it. I've tried it. I hoped I was the exception. I would have loved for it to really complemented my game, but in the long run, it's probably the most difficult rubber to use now, for all the same reasons that I said. It's harder and harder to play defensive. You can't, I mean, I back quite a few years, I knew somebody that used it on their backhand and used speed glue on it. Well, that was a different animal. It was 38 millimeter ball. It was really, really fast anti, and he knew how to use it, but I don't see that working. Nobody's going to speed glue, hopefully, anti-spin or any other rubber these days, but it's still out there. There's companies that are selling it, all types of different slightly different anti-spin, but in the long run, it's going to be just so much less friction that it's going to be very, very difficult for you to build a game around good anti. And there's a handful of exceptions to that, but what you'll notice is that not only are they skilled with the anti-spin, they're very, very good with the other side of the rubber. And that's a combination that lets you know that anti doesn't solve your problems. It might be a complement to what's already a really, really good game. And that, like I said, those are the exceptions. Appreciate your comments, and thanks for listening. And if I don't see you before the New Year's, Happy New Year. See you later. Thanks.